It all started with the wrong restaurant. Julian stood just outside the glass doors, gripping a single red flower he had bought from the vending stall across the street. His hands were rough calloused from pushing carts and lifting buckets, and the flower felt too delicate in them. He had changed into his best shirt, the one without any bleach stains, and combed his short brown hair until it lay flat. He wasn't supposed to be here. But then again, most of the best things in Julian's life weren't supposed to happen. The date had been a setup from his co-worker, something about a classy woman who needed a break from corporate robots. Julian had expected a cheap diner or maybe a loud sports bar. What he didn't expect was to find himself staring into the soft-lit lobby of one of the fanciest places in town. The hostess looked him up and down as if trying to decide whether he was lost or just bold. "Reservation name?" she asked without smiling. Julian Meyer," he replied, straightening up. She scanned her screen, blinked, then nodded toward the main dining hall. "She's already here." He couldn't see her clearly at first, just a silhouette seated by the window, posture sharp, legs crossed, fingers swirling a glass of water like it held secrets. She wore a cream-colored blouse that shimmered slightly under the chandelier light, and her blonde hair was clipped in a sleek twist. Definitely not the type of woman who'd swipe right on a janitor. As Julian walked closer, his steps slowed. He almost turned back, but then she looked up and smiled. "Julian," she said. Her voice was smooth, curious. "You're early." He nodded, unsure if she had mistaken him for someone else or if she was playing along with the same awkward misunderstanding. Either way, he sat down. "Yeah, I guess I got lucky with traffic." He was lying. He'd been so nervous, he left an hour early and waited 2 blocks away rehearsing what to say. The first few minutes were a blur. Her name was Amelia Berger. She was charming, quick-witted, and somehow both intimidating and vulnerable. She talked about her work in vague terms: executive decisions, team restructuring, brand pivots, and Julian nodded along, pretending he understood. He told her he worked in building maintenance, but didn't mention it was mostly toilets and spills. They laughed more than he expected. At one point, she touched his wrist when telling a story, and he forgot how to breathe for a second. He thought maybe, just maybe, this crazy mix-up could turn into something real. But then, halfway through dessert, everything changed. A man in a sharp gray suit walked past their table. He stopped, looked directly at Amelia, then at Julian, and tilted his head. "That's funny," he said. "You're not Lars." Amelia's smile froze. "Excuse me, you're not on a date with Lars Schmidt?" the man asked, confused. Julian's heart sank. He stood up slightly. "Wait, you're not Clara?" "No," Amelia said slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You're not Lars." There was a long silence, heavy and awkward, filled with realization. The man chuckled. "Well, this is going to be a story, huh?" Julian scratched the back of his neck. "Guess I sat at the wrong table." But before he could leave, Amelia held up a hand. "Wait." Julian froze. "I don't care," she said. "Sit back down." And that's when everything really started. Julian hesitated, half-seated, eyes flicking between Amelia and the untouched cup of espresso in front of her. The clinking of forks and murmured conversations filled the elegant dining hall, but in that moment, the rest of the world dulled to static. "You sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amelia's eyes stayed locked on his. "I've had worse dates," she said, then tilted her head. "Besides, you made me laugh. That counts for something." Julian sat back down slowly, uncertain but oddly calm now. Whatever spell had cast them into the same orbit, accident, fate, or a misprinted reservation, it wasn't done yet. He couldn't tell if she was humoring him or genuinely curious. But he wasn't going to ruin it by overthinking. He decided to let the evening guide itself. "So," Amelia started, lacing her fingers together on the tablecloth. "You're really not Lars, and I'm definitely not Clara. That makes us 2 strangers who accidentally met in the middle of someone else's story." Julian smirked. "Maybe it's a better story now." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Are you always this smooth, or is it the flower?" She gestured to the red bloom still sitting awkwardly on the edge of the table. He laughed. "Honestly, I was going to give that to a woman I've never met, hoping she'd like me just enough to forgive the cheap shirt and sweaty palms. But now, I think I'd rather give it to someone who already forgave both." For a second, something shifted in Amelia's eyes, like she wasn't expecting kindness without reason. She reached for the flower, her fingers brushing his. I haven't had a night off like this in years, she said quietly. Not one that didn't feel like a performance. You seem like someone who's always performing, Julian said, then regretted how blunt it sounded. But Amelia didn't flinch. Instead, she let out a long breath. You're not wrong. He waited, and when she didn't continue, he leaned in. You don't have to tell me, but if you do, I'll listen. That did it. Her shoulders dropped, and the mask she wore professional, polished, impenetrable cracked just slightly. I'm the CEO of a company that makes decisions about people's lives while forgetting to have one myself. And for a while, I convinced myself that was strength. But lately, I'm not so sure. Julian blinked. CEO? She nodded. Big title, big walls, no windows on the inside. He whistled. And here I thought I was nervous about spilling water on a nice tablecloth. They both chuckled again, but this time it was softer, sadder. He studied her face for a long moment. She looked like someone who carried too many expectations and too few hands to hold on to. He wondered how many nights she'd sat alone in places like this, pretending it didn't matter. Suddenly, Amelia stood. Come on. Julian frowned. What? She grabbed her coat. Let's get out of here. I've had enough small talk and polite shadows. I want air. Real air. Julian stood too. You don't want to split the bill? Amelia gave him a mischievous glance. I own the building. Outside, the night wrapped around them like velvet. Amelia's heels clicked against the pavement, but she soon slipped them off and walked barefoot, holding them like trophies. Julian followed, hands in his pockets, unsure if this was still a mistake or the best night of his life. They walked for blocks, past cafes closing for the night, past silent intersections, past the invisible weight both of them had carried into that restaurant. At some point, they stopped by a fountain, its water glowing blue beneath the streetlight. Amelia sat at the edge and looked up. My father used to take me to places like this, she said. Told me if I threw a coin in and made a wish, it might come true. I never believed him. Julian pulled a coin from his pocket and handed it to her. Try me. She took it, closed her eyes, threw. The coin splashed and disappeared. What did you wish for? He asked. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed violently in her bag. She checked it, then stood up sharply. What's wrong? Julian asked, concerned. Amelia's face was pale now, all humor gone. My company. There's been a breach. Someone accessed internal documents, confidential ones. Julian took a step closer. Is that bad? Bad enough to ruin everything I've built. Then she looked at him, her voice barely steady. Julian, this might be the last normal moment I'll have for a long time. And then she turned and walked into the night, leaving Julian with the sound of water, a red flower, and a growing sense that their story wasn't just beginning. It was already tangled in something far bigger than he imagined. Julian didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his creaky mattress in his modest apartment, staring at the red flower now tucked into a chipped mug by the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass, and the city's hum echoed faintly in the background. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her barefoot in the streetlight, her voice tight with fear, her eyes searching for control she no longer had. He barely knew Amelia, but something about her had carved a space in him that wasn't there the day before. And now she was in trouble. Big trouble. Not the kind you solve with apologies or polite emails, but the kind that ruins reputations and shatters companies. By morning, he almost convinced himself it wasn't his place, that she was someone from another world, one of suits, stock options, and sterile boardrooms. But when his phone lit up at 6:43 a.m. with a number he didn't recognize, and he answered to the sound of her voice saying, I didn't know who else to call, everything inside him shifted. Amelia's voice was strained but composed. Julian, can we meet? I need someone I can trust. He didn't even ask where, just threw on his work jacket and left without grabbing breakfast. When he arrived, it wasn't at some glass tower or private office. She had asked to meet at an old cafe tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. Inside, she sat hunched over a tablet, eyes scanning data like it was the only thing keeping her upright. You came, she said, almost surprised. Of course I did, Julian replied, sliding into the booth. You sounded like you needed backup. She offered a weak smile. I need more than backup. I need a miracle. Julian leaned in. Talk to me. She explained everything in rushed, hushed tones. Someone inside her company, someone high up, had accessed confidential financial forecasts and leaked them to an aggressive competitor. The leak made it look like Amelia herself had sold them out, and the board was already turning cold. "I built this place from nothing," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "I sacrificed everything, and now I might be forced out. Or worse, face charges I had nothing to do with." Julian sat in silence for a long moment, then said, "So what now? I need to prove it wasn't me. But I don't know who to trust inside the company. Everyone has an angle." Julian tilted his head. "Except me." Amelia looked at him for a long time. Exactly. That was the moment things stopped being just an accidental date. Over the next few days, Julian found himself swept into a world that made his janitor's uniform feel like a disguise. He accompanied Amelia to her office after hours, helping her comb through logs, timestamps, and internal communications. While she decoded complex trails of metadata, Julian used his custodial access to move through the building unnoticed. What once was a mop and badge now became a cover. One night, while passing through the executive floor, Julian noticed something strange: an unlocked drawer in the office of Amelia's chief technical officer, a man named Peter Lenz. Inside, he found a second phone, tucked beneath layers of folders. Its screen was cracked, but powered on, and its last message, still visible, was chilling. "Transfer complete. CEO's credentials used. She won't see it coming." Julian snapped a photo of the screen with his own phone and quickly replaced everything as it was. That night, when he showed Amelia the photo, her expression hardened. "Peter," she whispered. "I trusted him with everything." She paced the room, fire in her eyes. This is it. This proves it. If we can get into that device again, trace the source of the transfer, I can take it to the board." Julian nodded. "Then we get that phone." Amelia stopped pacing. "He's going out of town this weekend. I can check his calendar. That's our chance." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You're asking me to break into an executive's office?" Amelia smirked, but her voice was soft. "I'm asking you to help me survive." Julian didn't hesitate. But what neither of them knew was that someone else had already seen the message on Peter's second phone, and that someone had begun erasing every digital footprint Julian and Amelia had left behind. They were one step too late, and about to walk into a trap. Saturday night came with an eerie calm. Julian stood outside the corporate building in his usual gray work jacket, the same one he had worn every evening for the past 4 years. Nobody paid attention to the janitor. That was his advantage. Tonight, that anonymity would become his armor. He slipped his ID card through the reader and waited as the glass doors hissed open. The building was nearly deserted, just as Amelia had said. But still, something didn't feel right. He took the service elevator to the 17th floor, Peter Lenz's private domain. Each ding of the elevator sounded louder than it should have, echoing in the hollow silence. Julian wiped his palms on his pants and adjusted the flashlight tucked in his pocket. This wasn't cleaning duty anymore. This was infiltration. The door to Peter's office was locked, of course. But Julian had learned enough during his late-night runs with Amelia where the override codes were stored, which access panel glitched if tapped twice. When the lock gave a soft click and the door slid open, Julian stepped into a room that looked like it hadn't been touched in days. Everything was meticulously clean. Too clean. He went straight for the drawer. Just as before, the secondary phone lay hidden beneath the folders. He carefully retrieved it, heart thudding in his ears. The screen came alive with a flicker, but it didn't show messages. It showed a blinking red circle. Recording. Julian's chest tightened. It was a trap. Behind him, the office door slammed shut. "Put the phone down, Meyer." The voice belonged to Peter Lenz himself, stepping out from the shadowed side of the room, sleeves rolled up, his face cold and practiced. "You know," Peter continued, circling the desk slowly. "For a janitor, you're surprisingly resourceful. Amelia always did have a soft spot for strays." Julian didn't move. "So it was you." Peter smiled. "Of course it was me. You think she could run a company like this on her own? She was always the face. I was the engine." Julian held his ground. "Why frame her?" Peter's jaw tensed. "Because she was about to push me out. She was getting too ambitious. Too emotional. That woman would have thrown away a billion-dollar empire just to chase some ethical rebrand. Can you imagine? Ethics in this business?" Julian stepped back, gripping the phone tightly. "So you'd rather destroy her than let her change things?" Peter's eyes narrowed. "I'd rather survive. And now, thanks to you snooping around, I get to finish what I started." With a sudden motion, Peter lunged. Julian ducked, barely dodging the strike, and shoved the chair between them. The phone tumbled from his hand, skidding across the floor. The two men collided, grappling, furniture crashing around them. Julian had strength, but Peter had precision, years of control, and nothing left to lose. He slammed Julian against the window, pressing an elbow into his throat. "You don't belong here," Peter hissed. Julian gasped. "Neither do you." With a burst of adrenaline, Julian kicked backward, knocking Peter off balance. The older man stumbled, giving Julian just enough time to grab the fallen phone and sprint out of the office. Alarms blared. Peter must have triggered them during the struggle. Julian raced down the stairwell, 2 steps at a time, heart pounding. Behind him, footsteps echoed, faster now. He didn't know if he could outrun Peter or security or whatever plan had already been set in motion. But he had the phone. He had the evidence. At the ground level, he burst out into the loading dock just as a black car screeched to a stop in front of him. The back door flew open. "Get in." It was Amelia. Julian dove in, barely catching his breath. Amelia hit the gas, and they peeled off into the night. "What happened?" she shouted. Julian handed her the phone. He knew. He was waiting. "I barely made it out." Amelia's eyes widened. "Peter." Julian looked at her. "You were right. But it's worse than we thought. He's got more than just board-level access. He's playing a long game." Amelia stared ahead at the road. "Then we'll have to end it." "But how?" Julian asked. "He's already ahead of us." Amelia's jaw set. "Not for long. I have one last card to play." And just as she said it, her own phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. "What is it?" Julian asked. She turned the screen toward him. It was an email. Subject: termination notice. From Board of Directors, effective immediately. Julian stared at her. "They've already fired you." "No," she whispered. "They've erased me." The car rolled to a silent stop beneath an overpass, its headlights cutting through the mist like searching eyes. Amelia sat motionless in the driver's seat, her hands still clenched around the wheel. Her phone lay face down in her lap. The board's decision now final, irreversible, and coldly impersonal, just like the system she had once controlled. Julian reached over, gently touched her arm. "Amelia." She didn't respond. He tried again. "You're not gone." "Not really." She finally looked at him, eyes glassy. "They removed my access, Julian. All credentials revoked. My name wiped from every executive document. I'm a ghost in the machine I built." Julian held her gaze. "Then maybe that's what we need right now. A ghost." For a moment, Amelia blinked, processing, recalibrating. Then something inside her reignited. Not panic, not despair, but precision. "If I can't fight them inside the boardroom," she said, her voice steadying, "then I'll dismantle them from the outside." Julian nodded. "And I'll help you." Amelia turned the engine off. "No, you've done enough. You almost got killed tonight." "That doesn't mean I'm quitting," Julian replied. "This isn't just your battle anymore." They sat in silence for a beat, the tension between defeat and resolve thick in the air. Then Amelia said, "There's one place Peter didn't cover. One node outside the corporate firewall. I had it built years ago as a backup in case the system went down, my own off-site data vault. Nobody knows it exists. Not even the CTO." Julian leaned in. "What's inside?" "Everything," Amelia whispered. "Every board meeting transcript, email logs, internal audits, including the blackmail contracts Peter used to keep them silent. If we can extract and leak that, we don't just expose him, we bring down the rot he's built." "Where is it?" Julian asked. She looked at him. "In an old storage site, 20 miles from here. But we'll need to be careful. If Peter's suspects were still moving, he'll come after us." Julian gave a half smile. "Then we better move fast." They didn't waste time. Amelia shed her heels and changed into black sneakers she kept in the trunk. Julian pulled a hoodie over his work uniform, blending once more into the faceless undercurrent of the city. They drove with headlights dimmed, taking side roads, staying off major routes. Amelia guided them with sharp focus, cutting through the darkness with the precision of someone who'd spent her life mastering control and now had nothing left to lose. The storage site was unmarked. Just a rusted chain-link fence and a faded keypad bolted to a metal door. Amelia typed in a 12-digit code from memory. The lock clunked open, and the door swung inward with a metallic groan. Inside, dust shimmered in the beam of Julian's flashlight. Old furniture, sealed crates, and a single reinforced steel cabinet stood at the far end. Amelia walked straight to it. "This is it," she said. "Biometric lock. Only reads my fingerprint and retina." She leaned in, eyes scanning the panel. Click. The door opened. Inside, a single laptop blinked to life, connected to a private satellite signal. Amelia sat, cracked her knuckles, and started working. The screen filled with cascading windows of encrypted logs, contracts, audio recordings, layers of corruption laid bare. Julian stood behind her, awed. "You kept all this?" She didn't look up. "I didn't trust them. Turns out, I was right." They worked for hours, organizing files, preparing a data packet that couldn't be denied. When they were nearly done, Amelia looked at Julian. "There's one thing left," she said. "Delivery. To the press." She shook her head. "To the one person the board still fears, Myra Langston. She's a regulatory watchdog. Ruthless. Independent. If she gets this file, she'll launch a federal inquiry before sunrise." Julian blinked. "And she'll believe you?" "She doesn't have to believe me," Amelia said. "She only has to believe the data." Julian helped her transfer the files to a secure flash drive. As they stepped outside, the sky had begun to lighten, soft grays stretching across the horizon. But just as Amelia was locking the cabinet, Julian stiffened. He heard it. Tires crunching gravel. Lights off. Then footsteps. Multiple. "Amelia," he whispered. "We're not alone." She turned sharply. A shadow moved behind the fence. Then another. Then voices. "Low. Male. Approaching." "They found us," Julian said. Amelia backed toward the car, keys in hand. "We run. Now." But before they could move, a figure stepped into the open. It wasn't Peter. It was someone Julian had never seen. Tall. Black coat. No expression. He held up a phone and showed them a video feed of Amelia sitting at the laptop just minutes ago. "You've committed corporate espionage," he said calmly. "And we have the footage to prove it." Julian stepped forward. "She owns the company." "Not anymore," the man replied. "And now you're both fugitives." He reached inside his coat. Julian reacted instinctively, shoving Amelia aside just as something glinted in the man's hand. A stun rod. It cracked through the air, and the world went black. Julian awoke to a stabbing pain behind his eyes and the bitter taste of iron on his tongue. The air was stale, humming faintly with electricity, and smelled faintly of oil and mold like forgotten spaces that were never meant to be found. As his vision cleared, he realized he was strapped to a metal chair, wrists bound tight behind his back with plastic ties. A single buzzing light above flickered with every breath he took. Across the room, equally restrained, Amelia sat slouched against the wall, her lips split, one eye beginning to swell shut. Yet her eyes, through all of it, held a fire that refused to dim. She lifted her chin the moment she noticed he was awake. "They got us," she murmured, voice like cracked glass paned but unbroken. "Dragged us to some bunker, off-grid, probably Peter's pet project." Julian tried to move but winced as the plastic ties cut deeper into his skin. His entire body ached, but the real pain came when he asked, "The flash drive?" Amelia's answer came with a faint smirk, even through the blood. She gently tapped her shoe against the ground. "Still with me." They checked everything, except the sole of a CEO's sneakers. The heavy door groaned open before either of them could speak again. In walked Peter Lenz, pristine as ever, his suit pressed, hair styled, and confidence oozing with cruelty. He didn't speak immediately. He merely watched them for a long moment, letting the silence choke the room. Then, with a dismissive tilt of his head, he said, "You should have stayed in your place, Meyer." His eyes slid toward Amelia, colder now. "And you? You should have known better than to build an empire with windows for walls." She didn't blink. "And you should have known," she said quietly, "what happens to men who forget what real power is made of." Peter gave a patronizing chuckle. "This isn't a fairy tale. There's no redemption arc here. Only statistics." He turned to his guards. "Clean it up. Make it quiet. Electrical fire, ventilation malfunction. Tragic but convenient." The men moved forward without hesitation. Julian felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs. He didn't have a plan, but he had instincts, and those instincts screamed now or never. "Amelia," he whispered through clenched teeth, "when I move, kick the one on the left." She didn't question. She didn't hesitate. Julian lurched his body sideways just as the guard reached for him, using his entire weight to send the chair crashing against the ground. The sound shattered the silence. Amelia kicked out hard, her foot landing squarely in the kneecap of the second guard, who howled and staggered back. Amid the confusion, Julian rolled toward the door, managing to grab a utility key card dangling from the guard's belt. He flung it toward Amelia with a flick of his wrist. She caught it midair, rose on one knee, and slid it through the panel beside the door. A green light blinked. The lock released. They didn't wait. Julian shoved the door open, and together they ran stumbling through gray corridors, the sound of alarms rising behind them like a tidal wave. Their feet pounded against concrete, lungs burning, blood rushing in their ears. They didn't know the layout, but they knew what freedom felt like, and they chased that feeling through stairwells, emergency exits, and side doors until the night air hit their faces like a resurrection. When they burst into a dark alley behind the facility, Julian nearly collapsed from the weight of it all. But Amelia kept moving. "We're not safe yet," she said, clutching her ribs. "We need eyes. Witnesses. Somewhere public." They sprinted until they found it, a busy public square where lights, cameras, and people gathered in organized chaos. And there, beneath the blinking red light of a news van, Amelia stepped forward with the resolve of someone who had just crawled back from the grave. "My name is Amelia Berger," she announced, voice unwavering. "I have proof of corporate corruption, internal sabotage, and a cover-up designed to destroy lives." Reporters surged forward, microphones stretching like vines. Julian stood beside her, silent but firm, like a pillar she could lean on. Within hours, the story exploded across every screen. Peter's name was everywhere for all the wrong reasons. Federal agents raided the underground facility by sunrise. The board released panicked statements. And justice real, public, undeniable finally began to move. Weeks later, Julian returned to work, but not as a janitor. Amelia had offered him something more, something real, a role as head of the newly formed Integrity Division. The title meant less to him than the purpose. He still wore boots, still drank vending machine coffee, but now when people passed him in the halls, they didn't look through him. They nodded. They smiled. They saw him. One afternoon, as he adjusted a framed photo of the two of them standing in front of a courthouse, Amelia appeared in the doorway, bruises gone, her power restored, but something softer in her eyes now. "You know," she said, "we never did finish that blind date." Julian looked up, smile slow and easy. "Still time, right?" She nodded, stepping in. "This time, let's skip the silk napkins and overpriced desserts. I'd rather have something messy, something real." He walked over, reached for her hand, and said, "Then we start from the beginning. Not with a reservation, not with a mistake, but with a choice. Together."